Hi everyone, my name is Rebecca. I'm a fish biologist and ichthyologist and also a PhD student. I specialise and study the evolution of fluorocard catfishes, which are also known as plecs or whiptail catfishes within the aquarium trade. I've also worked in the aquarium trade for many years and been a fish keeper for many years, and I'm going to admit I water change my fishes. My personal tanks get water changed 50% twice a week, or maybe more than that depending on how cold it's coming out the tap. My research aquariums get water changed over 50%, so more or less 75% once a week, depending on what I'm doing with the tanks. I water change all the time, and it's no hassle because that's what it is to look after animals. Animals need maintenance, and that's part of having animals. So this is why I'm going to talk about water changes, and I always do a video every so often on the topic because it is for some reason controversial when it doesn't need to be. We maintain all of the animals we keep, whether it's removing poo, removing wee or anything like that, and fishes are no exception. And I know there's much popularity behind minimal maintenance setups, but it doesn't mean they're actually good for the animal, and it doesn't mean all waste is being processed. So why do I water change? Generally, as I suggested, it's removing waste. So this might be nitrates, which is the most well-known one. This is what fishes kind of excrete instead of what we would have as urine or urates if you're thinking about like birds and reptiles, I think. But also fishes do produce urea, which is similar to what mammals produce that then becomes urine, I guess. It depends, the volumes actually depend on the species. So actually saying that it's all ammonia that the fishes are producing is a bit sort of unreliable because it depends on the fishes, it depends on so many factors which they're producing, and therefore there's probably the bacteria that can process both, which might be quite an interesting concept when thinking about how you're cycling a tank, given that we're always focusing on ammonia, but some fishes do produce more urea. I don't know. But it's not just this ammonia that becomes nitrates that freshwater fishes or fishes in general produce. Other mentioning the urea, we've also got other compounds. So it might be what might be called pheromones, hormones. They're kind of a little bit debatable in water volumes. The literature's, I guess, a little bit debatable on this, but there's other things fishes are producing or releasing, whether it's that ion exchange or just other compounds that we're not really thinking about. And also don't forget that fishes are taking up compounds from the water, not just from their diet, and it does depend on what species to what volumes they're sort of balancing, whether it's a soft water species or a low conductivity species that's not really taking as much from the water, taking more from their diet, or it's a very high conductivity one that doesn't want to lose that water, but they're still maintaining that balance, that ionic osmotic balance. Osmosis isn't just about water, it's also about ions and maintaining those internal ions. And these ions or compounds or minerals are vital for the function, the biology of animals. Stuff like calcium, not just for bones but also for neuron function. And then you've also got like magnesium, also important for bones. Phosphorus is a vital element just for life itself. It's part of energy. So this plant that my second keeps getting in the way. But so it's replenishing but also removing. So it's maintaining that sort of balance within the aquarium. That is that fish's ecosystem, that fish's sort of habitat or environment at that sort of base level as much as you can, because there's only so much we can test for. We can test for nitrates, but our test kits are only so reliable, and it really depends on the test kit itself. We can't test for a lot of these compounds. Sometimes we have very sort of indirect ways of testing for these compounds, whether it's through TDS, conductivity, or general hardness. Carbonate hardness, I guess you could look at it in a way, or pH. they're all going to show this sort of balance of minerals and compounds within the water. But it's very difficult to actually directly test for. There are actually test kits for like magnesium and I'd assume calcium and that lot, but they're very difficult to buy as individual test kits and not many people use them, and really there's no real understanding of what, it's very individual what the base level is for different fishes, and we don't really know like what's going to be higher than others in their natural ecosystem. It really varies on the fish. There's some very well studied water bodies. So, other than it sort of being very useful as a sort of maintaining that base level, we've also got to think about what happens in the natural environment. And many people aren't exposed to nature as much as they think they are. A lot of the environment we're seeing around us is very anthropogenic, so influenced by humans. Whether it's your local lake, which is probably more of a pond, that might have, and probably was built by people. It might have had the rivers that were sort of the inflow prevented or new rivers created from it. It might have just been, well, it might have different nutrient sources to what it used to be, especially when it comes to agriculture, or even the fertilizers you're using in your garden. There's so many influences that are more anthropogenic than natural, and even just if we look at the way rivers are, a lot of them are man-made in the way they actually flow these days. So it's very difficult to gauge, especially when you're looking out at your local sort of river or lake or something like that. But what is natural? All rivers, we all know, they have a large amount of turnover or discharge. That's what's the source going out all the way to the mouth of the river, and that's constantly replenishing these water parameters or water minerals, stuff like that, and they're generally all oligotrophic, so very low in nutrients. As you go further down, that nutrients is probably building up as you're getting things falling in the river, and as the river slows down, it's starting to deposit them. So there is quite a lot of diversity there. But rivers do have that constant flow, and that's where a lot of our fishes come from, rivers. And there's a lot more flow than people give them credit. Like, people think discus come from very slow flow. There's quite a lot of flow where discus come from. They can manage quite a good current in the wild. And then you've got like laurel cards and stuff which can manage a lot more depending on the species. But rivers are just, they're kind of like just constant turnover. The main one people are looking at when it comes to water changes is lakes. Some of the fishes we keep do come from lakes, and there's this idea that lakes are a lot more still, they're a lot more stable, but they're just as varied as rivers for changes in parameters seasonally. It really depends on the lake itself and actual geography, the hydrology. All of that will vary how the lake, the nutrients works in the lake, the flow levels, but they generally will have a river flowing into them, or maybe there's groundwater or other sources into it, and then an outflow. Sometimes it gets changed by people, so you get reservoirs. These are usually man-made entirely, but that's where people are storing water because fresh water is a vital resource. But most lakes will have that inflow and that outflow, whether it's groundwater, whether it's rivers. You might have the flood sort of zone, so when you get seasonal floods it might overflow. You'll get mixing, so there's a lot of turnover, whether it's from waves, from the wind itself, or it's just from the currents, the seasons, or just from that river, sort of that inflow and that outflow. It's really difficult because lakes are so diverse. And it's also diverse in how they function, and also depends on the actual sources, and you might get a lake that's somewhat divided depending on the source waters at each side and then the outflow. And also remember that so many are anthropogenic. But when we're thinking about lakes that have no source, like there's no rivers coming inflow, and no rivers coming out, or groundwater either way, or anything like that, then you'll think about a very sort of closed ecosystem. And this is what people are kind of replicating. And we've got some very famous examples, and these are known as like soda lakes. And if you look at soda lakes, think about where flamingos are found. Think about soda lake cichlids. And these aren't Lake Tanganyika cichlids, they're not Lake Malawi cichlids. These are from very high hardness, you could almost say saline, well it is almost practically saline water. And this is because there is no source coming in and there's no source coming out. Maybe it could be topped up by rainfall, but that's not really enough. And if you're topping up with your aquariums and you're saying, oh, but I'm topping up mine more than this lake probably gets filled up with water. Firstly, these lakes are getting filled by rainwater. That is low conductivity, like very little minerals in that water. When you're topping up from the tap, you're adding more minerals in, but then you're also getting certain ones depleted as the fish are using them, also competing by the plant. So bear that in mind, that unless you're topping up raro, it's very different to actual replacing rainwater. Or you can use rainwater, it depends where you live, and because rainwater safety does vary a lot. So these aquariums, if you're not water changing, they are not natural, they're not replacing anything that we see in nature. Just because it looks natural with our false sense of nature, like when we go to a botanical garden or something like that and we say, oh, we're in nature. It's not. A lot of forests we see are not natural, a lot of lakes we see are not natural, and it's not replacing what's in nature. And these ecosystems, these anthropogenic ones, have massive issues with species diversity. So these man-made lakes probably have little to no species diversity. They probably have maybe carp. It doesn't help their invasive species get added to, such as different plants and different fishes, but they're probably low in diversity anyway. And you're not really replacing, like, most of the fishes we keep aren't even from these very extreme environments anyway. How many people have soda lake cichlids? A lot of people have carp in the form of goldfish, which are very adaptable, but they're still it's not replacing what they would naturally be caught in. It's replacing like those fishing lakes, which kind of have a source in and out most of them anyway, I guess. But some of these sources you don't even see, some might be underground, particularly when it comes to lakes and stuff like that. So the main thing is people give plants a lot of credit, and they do deserve credit. They're amazing organisms, they're like machines, they pump different CO2, oxygen, they respire, which is like one sort of mechanical process, and they also photosynthesize, and they have all this interaction with ions and things like that, ions, compounds, minerals, whatever, because they're just another sort of evolutionary path. And there's so many different photosynthetic organisms, and I guess it was evolved sort of like convergently. Many found the solution is photosynthesis, not just these green plants. There's many different algae, bacteria and stuff that aren't even remotely related. But people assume that a lot about plants when it comes to nutrient uptake. So nutrient uptake varies a lot between species. So one species will take up a different amount of nutrients to another, but not just the amount of nutrients, but the different types of nutrients. And nutrients, we generally, when you think about horticulture, think of NPK, nitrogen, potassium, nitrogen, phosphorus and potassium. It is a little bit by, dropping things. Why potassium has a K as their elemental symbol, but NPK is the main one. But they take up so many different minerals and compounds. Nitrogen, we think of nitrates and ammonia and stuff like that. But so we're assuming how much they're taking up, and it varies depending on the species. People say, oh, but the pothos and monstera take up a lot. And firstly, there's a lot of species of monstera. Well, I think there's only like 30. Pothos, I guess, epipremium, there's probably quite a few more. And then people are saying philodendron. Firstly, philodendron are massive. So philodendron are really diverse, and their nutrient uptake is going to be equally as diverse. So it really depends on that type of philodendron that you're talking about. People are just generalising plants as one thing, and that's going to vary. But not just does it vary depending on the species of plant, and that comes with aquatic plants too, it will vary depending on conditions. So if you've got low lighting, they're going to be taking up much less nutrients in general. So they might be taking up, or there might even be an imbalance. And also if you have high of one nutrients, then it might cause them to take less of another, or there might be the lowest fact of nutrients limits how much they take of another. And it's so species specific. We're really making so many assumptions and generalizations when we're saying, oh, plants will take up all the nitrates. Firstly, will they take up all of those compounds? Do they have preferential, do they have a preference between different ones, and in what conditions? If your lighting is low, then it's going to make a big factor. And also it will depend on the type of lighting you've got, the temperature, the amount of CO2, maybe even the flow rates. There's so many different factors to it, and plants are as individual and species specific as animals are. They are not one thing. They've been around on this planet for a very long time. The other factor is that's really going to limit it is a lot of plants we're keeping in aquariums are actually terrestrial, so their uptake of nutrients is almost in a stressed state because they are not growing as they would in nature. Like Monstera, Pothos, some philodendrons, they're climbers naturally, so they're almost in a state of trying to find something to climb up and put their roots into. I've got a good Monstera here which kind of shows how they want to grow. It's not that easy to see, but it's actually growing on a bit of wood. And that's how they're growing, so they're just in a juvenile state otherwise, and they're not going to be taking up probably as much nutrients as they want to because they're just trying to reach for the best lighting, which they're going to get when they grow up. But there's other sort of things that are affected, like CO2. Then naturally, many are going to be evolved for much higher levels of CO2, oxygen, factors like that, rather than in the aquatic environment. And if you've got no flow or little flow and no filter, that's probably not going to help that much with actually getting that circulation. And they're going to be competing for the fishes in all of these factors because fishes take up a lot from their environment anyway, not just from their diet. So the sort of other thing that people will use when it comes to water changes is they mention the wide scientific research in recirculating systems. So recirculating systems are quite, well, they're used in aquaculture, but I wouldn't say they're common at all. So aquaculture is more farming fish. And farming is the key word here, because if you're farming, your aims are very different to if you're keeping something ornamentally. So almost the idea that farming, if you're using farming to back up your points on how you should keep something ornamentally, it's like saying I should keep my chicken in a battery farm because that's how they keep them in farms. And that's not really a welfare point, to be honest, because there's different aims. Those chickens in the farms aren't going to be living as long in that environment as your animal is going to live ornamentally. So recirculating systems is largely used because it's for aquaculture, for farming fish. It's mostly used for fishes like carp, ictalurids, tilapia, stuff like that. So very sort of adaptable, generalist fish, easy to feed, easy to grow, does very well with higher nitrates. Most of our fishes don't encounter higher nitrates in the wild, and many of our fishes are wild caught anyway. And also, these fishes aren't going to live long. So you might see the studies on nitrates, but firstly, these fishes they're going to be eaten in maybe a year, 2 years. Your ornamental fishes should live, many of them, over 10 years. So it's very different aims. it's also about efficiency. Recirculating systems are usually used where it's very difficult to obtain fresh water, and or either through legislation or it's just quite a lot more expensive, or maybe the source water is a little bit more tricky. But generally in aquaculture you see a lot more of water changes used. I've seen ones which kind of in UK you need a license for it, but abstract. So take water from the river and directly pump it through the aquaculture sort of like farm. And there's loads that do that. I think it kind of, because for these people are kind of getting that there's so much diversity to aquaculture, but these systems exist because it doesn't sort of fulfill what they want to see. But recirculating systems do. It's just entirely different purposes. These fishes aren't meant to live long. They're just meant to be eaten pretty soon. So you want them just to grow fast, quick, and then gone basically. But if you look at these systems, they are in no way similar to these dirted aquariums. Firstly, they have often a lot of chemical filtration. They have a lot of filtration, so big filter systems. And there's more filter than there is fish, to be honest. And there's a lot of flow. There's so much debate on how it's kind of organised, but it's very different species in general. I would say we're talking to like technicians and stuff, they're very difficult to actually set up. They're a lot more expensive, and yes. So water changes are important. It's literally, for most people, it's going to be half an hour of your week. If you have a fish room, well, that's your choice to get many more aquariums, and therefore you should expect that much more maintenance. If you've got certain fishes, well, it's your choice to get those fishes that need that higher maintenance. You can't just sort of shortcut it because you want to. It's like the difference between owning a horse and owning, I guess, a dog or guinea pigs. The horses are going to be a lot more heavy lifting, and they're going to have a lot more waste to change than the smaller animals. Fishes, the thing is that they are in an environment that we have to maintain entirely. We are maintaining not just their waste, so we're not just changing their bedding, we're also changing their whole environment and maintaining that whole environment. It's not like reptiles either. If it was, it'd be like changing the air in there constantly. And we are dealing with so many different species. Anyway, I can film any videos sort of adding to my points, but I'm going to end this video here. Thanks for watching. If you like my videos, please comment, like and subscribe, and goodbye.